Seriously? The right to vote, something we take for granted today, was once a radical idea for half the population. Imagine being told, just because of your gender, you had no say in the rules that shaped your life. Sounds wild, right? Alright, people, let's talk about suffrage. Not just a word you hear in history class, but a concept that changed the course of nations. Suffrage means having a voice, a vote, a say in what happens to you and your community. It's a fancy word for the right to vote, but for centuries that right was reserved for a select few, usually wealthy men. Women? Not even close. Sounds basic, right? Like, you breathe, you drink water, you vote. But for women it was a dream that seemed almost impossible. Voting was seen as a privilege, not a right, and definitely not for everyone. Not so fast. Back in the 1800s, women voting? Forget about it. The idea was so outlandish, most people didn't even consider it a real possibility. It was like asking a cat to do your taxes. Unthinkable. The very notion was met with laughter, disbelief, and sometimes outright hostility. Why did women want the vote? Imagine living in a world where you couldn't choose your leaders, your laws, or even how your tax dollars were spent. Every decision that affected your life was made by someone else. Talk about taxation without representation. Women paid taxes, worked jobs, and contributed to society but had no voice in how things were run. That's not just unfair, it's infuriating. Women were basically second-class citizens in their own country. They could be teachers, nurses, factory workers, or mothers, but when it came to politics, they were invisible. They were expected to raise families, manage households, and look pretty, all while having zero say in how their lives were run. Their work was essential, but their opinions were ignored. Now, some folks back then said women were too emotional to vote, as if having feelings disqualified you from making decisions about your own future. Others claimed they were perfectly happy letting their husbands handle politics. The idea was that women belonged in the home, not the voting booth. Yeah, right. Imagine being told you're too emotional to vote in a world run by dudes who started wars over, well, male ego. The fight for the right to vote wasn't just about ballots. It was about dignity, equality, and the belief that everyone deserves a voice. Enter the OG suffragists, the women who dared to dream of a world where women's rights weren't an oxymoron. In a time when women were expected to stay silent, these trailblazers refused to blend into the background. They challenged the status quo, risking ridicule and even arrest, all for the radical idea that women deserved a voice. Their courage and determination would set the stage for generations to come. There was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a writer and activist who probably penned some epic side-eyes in her journals. Stanton was more than just a sharp wit. She was a strategic thinker, a mother of 7, and a relentless advocate for equality. She spent countless hours drafting speeches, organizing meetings, and rallying women to the cause, all while challenging the deeply ingrained beliefs of her era. Susan B. Anthony, the tireless organizer who could rock a pocket watch better than any dude. Anthony was the engine behind the movement, traveling from town to town, giving speeches and collecting signatures for petitions. She was known for her discipline, her sense of humor, and her unwavering belief that justice would prevail, even when the odds seemed impossible. And Sojourner Truth, a former enslaved woman who became a powerful voice for both abolition and women's rights. This woman was a legend. Her speeches electrified audiences, and her famous words, "Ain't I a woman?" still echo today. Truth's courage in the face of adversity inspired countless others to join the fight, reminding everyone that the struggle for equality was far from over. In 1848, these women and others held a little gathering at Seneca Falls, New York. It was like Coachella for feminists, minus the flower crowns and questionable fashion choices. The Seneca Falls Convention brought together activists, thinkers, and everyday women who were ready to demand change. For 2 days they debated, discussed, and dreamed of a future where women could shape their own destinies. They drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, a document declaring, gasp, that women should have equal rights, including the right to vote. This bold statement was modeled after the Declaration of Independence, but with a twist. It called out the injustices women faced and demanded immediate change. Signing it took guts, but these women weren't afraid to make history. The Seneca Falls Convention was a game-changer. It officially launched the women's suffrage movement in the United States. Suddenly, the idea of women voting wasn't just a fantasy, it was a movement, with leaders, followers, and a clear mission. The ripples from Seneca Falls would spread across the country, inspiring marches, protests, and decades of activism. Sure, some people laughed, some scoffed, and some probably choked on their afternoon tea. The idea of women demanding rights was shocking to many, and the backlash was real. Newspapers mocked the convention, and critics dismissed the women as troublemakers. But the suffragists pressed on, undeterred by the haters. But the seed was planted. What started as a small gathering in upstate New York would grow into a nationwide movement, changing the course of history. The courage of these early activists inspired future generations to keep fighting, proving that even the boldest dreams can take root and flourish. Then came the Civil War, a time when the entire nation was supposed to be focused on one thing: ending slavery and preserving the Union. The country was torn apart, families divided, and the future of millions hung in the balance. But while the battle raged on the fields, another fight was brewing in the hearts and minds of women across America. The suffragists, being the multitaskers they were, figured, why not tackle two forms of oppression at once? While the men were off fighting, women saw an opportunity to push for both the abolition of slavery and their own rights. They organized rallies, wrote petitions, and spoke out in public forums, often risking ridicule and even danger. They campaigned for the abolition of slavery while also reminding everyone that, hey, remember us? We'd like some rights too. It was a bold move, and not everyone appreciated their efforts. Some thought they should wait their turn, but these women weren't about to sit quietly on the sidelines. Suffragists juggled activism with daily life, balancing family responsibilities, work, and their relentless pursuit of justice. Their side hustle was nothing less than changing the course of history. After the war, the fight for suffrage got complicated. The abolition of slavery was a huge victory, but it also brought new questions about who should have the right to vote. Suddenly, the movement was split over priorities and strategies. There were arguments over strategy, disagreements about tactics, and enough internal drama to make a reality TV show. Leaders clashed over whether to support the 15th Amendment, which granted black men the right to vote but left women out entirely. One group, led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, wanted to focus on a constitutional amendment for women's suffrage. They believed that only a national solution could guarantee equal rights for all women, everywhere. Another group, thinking that was too ambitious, wanted to focus on getting the vote state by state. They argued that small victories would build momentum and eventually lead to nationwide change. The debates were fierce and sometimes personal. Letters flew back and forth, newspapers took sides, and friendships were tested as the movement struggled to find its path forward. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, except the kitchen was the American political system and the cooks were badass women trying to dismantle the patriarchy, one heated debate at a time. The suffragists didn't just sit around and debate, they took their message to the streets, literally. They organized marches, rallies, and parades demanding the right to vote. Imagine thousands of women marching down Fifth Avenue wearing sashes and carrying banners while onlookers gawked and probably muttered things like, "Someone get these women a sandwich." Some women even resorted to hunger strikes after being arrested for, wait for it, picketing the White House. They were force-fed in prison, which is about as fun as it sounds. But they knew that sometimes you have to make a scene, even an uncomfortable one, to be heard. Now, it's important to remember that the suffrage movement wasn't just a bunch of white ladies in fancy hats sipping tea. Women of color were on the front lines of this fight, facing both sexism and racism. There was Ida B. Wells Barnett, a journalist and activist who fought tirelessly against lynching and for the right of black women to vote. There was Zitkala Sa, a Native American writer and activist who fought for the rights of indigenous people, including the right to vote. These women and countless others faced discrimination and prejudice, even within the suffrage movement itself. But they persisted because they knew that the fight for equality had to include all women, not just some. Finally, after decades of struggle, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on August 18, 1920. It granted women the right to vote, a right that had been denied for far too long. It wasn't a perfect victory. Women of color still face significant barriers to voting, particularly in the Jim Crow South. But the 19th Amendment was a major milestone, a testament to the courage, determination, and sheer will of the suffragists. So why are we still talking about suffrage in the 21st century? Because the fight for equality is far from over. Women still face discrimination, prejudice, and systemic barriers in many aspects of life. The story of suffrage is a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes generations of activism, advocacy, and yes, sometimes even a little bit of troublemaking. So the next time you cast a vote, remember the women who fought so hard for that right, and then go out there and use it wisely. After all, they didn't fight for our right to vote so we could just stay home and binge watch reality TV, did they?